If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts.
The blah blah.
Sending out good vibes.
The blah blah.
Good vibes. Good vibes.
The blah blah.
Good vibes. Good vibes.
108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that.
You can change life on Earth. You can have an impact on Earth. You can be a person of action. So the philosophy was changing. And Bacon absorbed all of that. And that what led to his push for science.
Welcome back to the Gramerica Show. We are going to be chatting some Baconian Shakespeare again around here. A favorite with, of course, the Alan Green episodes. This time we've got Robert Frederick coming at us to chat about his podcast and his deep dive into Francis Bacon and Shakespeare and the Freemasons and all sorts of crazy stuff tumbling down the rabbit hole. It's, I don't know, maybe a little more expansive than Alan's stuff in this regard. What do you think?
I don't know. I think we didn't have enough time to dig into the more occult and esoteric part of it, where he gave us a really good background. Like he started going through all the background of Bacon and Shakespeare and all that. It was more, I think it was kind of more of like a deeper background dive. But I think we ran out of time to do more of the mysterious kind of stuff, in my opinion. We'll have to have him back.
Who, Alan or Robert? Or both?
Well, both.
At the same time.
And the other guest we had on about Bacon. Do you remember?
I don't think I do.
He heard this already, and he's been texting me, and he wants to. He's got an idea for a kind of a game-breaking show. So
a three-way.
Yeah,
I don't
know about that.
Be a five-way technically. Who's that again?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask me. Fuck, I got to look it up. I think his name is David.
David?
Yeah.
David the Bacon guy? David Bacon.
Yeah, see, but that's not fair now. John de Herrera.
You know what my...
John de Herrera. Sorry, it's not David, it's John. I get Johns and Davids mixed up sometimes.
You know what's funny? Is that... there was a time when they called my dad Glenn Bacon.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
That was like the given name for, that was the name that they got given. The last name was Bacon. So if I would have, there was a chance that if I would have stayed down that road, my last name could have been Bacon. Can you imagine?
Oh my God. That's pretty funny.
Explains a lot, maybe.
The funny thing is, I was reading the story that's probably going to come out as an extra episode here from our friend Coach Chris. And part of his story was the synchronicity that you gave him a 9.42 on.
Coach Chris?
Yeah. And it was the same episode as the Bacon synchronicity. When I was talking to Robert Frederick, I couldn't find the email. I got to talk to you about that, actually. My email is not going back as far as it used to. There's something wrong with it.
I'm not the email guy.
I need to talk to my tech support guy.
You know who you got to talk to? The handler. What? You got to talk to the handler.
Oh, no. He's always messing up my emails.
You hear that, James? You're always messing up his emails. Can you just fix this, please? Once and for all before you run back down to Mexico?
So here's a little, this is from the story that's going to be in the episode, but it's funny enough is I couldn't find the email with the original Bacon Synchro, and he writes it down in this thing, which I was reading the day after we recorded with Robert. So he said, to recall, it was a piss synchro. So this is Darren. Darren gave him a 9.42
for piss.
Yeah. He says, I sent in after I pissed the bed for the first time and last time in my life. Just after waking up to this disaster, I randomly selected an episode of the Grimerica Show from the past to listen to while I cleaned up. A few minutes into the episode, Darren describes how he pissed his bed one time after dreaming that he had been peeing. It was a synchronicity impactful enough to write in about. However, it wasn't the first, nor would it be the last. If I wrote in about every synchronicity that I have with the show, I'd be writing in every week. You both considered that maybe it would be in the category of a ripple stick. And then the ripple continued. The next email read by Graham on the show was from Bob. So now this is Robert, who we're talking about here, who had the episode.
Is Bob Robert Frederick?
Yeah. Who wrote in about randomly selecting a book and tossing it on his bed just before sending an email to a friend about the secret history of Francis Bacon and the Rosicrucians. After clicking send, Bob opened the book for his eyes to land on large print of the name Francis Bacon in a book that was titled The Roots of Coincidence about Psychic Phenomena. As I was listening to the synchro for the first time as it followed mine, I was coincidentally standing over the stove frying bacon of all things. That was a rare thing since we rarely eat meat. But I had a house full of kids that morning. It's at most at once or twice a year occurrence where I would fry bacon. Usually my sweetheart Anya does the cooking only because she is much better at it than I am. I felt the ripple continue, and I briefly described it on the 400th episode call-in show. Anyways, there's so much more involved, he says. He gave the shortest version with zero magic and a bit of synchronicity on the short phone conversation. When I was writing the show notes for this episode, Bacon kept coming up on the TV. Bacon.
What?
Pretty funny.
What are you watching?
I was sitting with Maria. She was watching Friends or something like that.
So is it bacon commercials? Like commercials for bacon?
It was a bacon commercial. The first one was baking, and I thought, was that bacon? And then bacon came up right when I was typing bacon.
Ugh.
Pretty funny.
Is it? Oh.
Yeah, it was.
Did you buy any bacon?
No, but I had bacon today, though.
Oh, wow. Synchro. That's funny.
Anyways.
What you got? What you got for us, Willis?
Well, I mean, I got a project operation. I got a quote, a great quote.
A great quote?
Yeah. No emails to go through.
No emails this week? No one emails us anymore?
Social media and stuff. But
I could always go to the social media, see what they're drumming up.
I mean, you've been putting out these fiery.
My memes are white hot fire. I steal them, to be honest. I don't make them. I steal them. But I know which ones to steal. I know which ones will get the traction. Your meme game's weak, bro. Actually, that's not true. You have good ones, but you bury them in a stack.
No, sometimes.
So you got like a great meme stuck in a shit sandwich. Okay? You got a shitty meme.
Stacks get more. Those
shitty
stacks
meme,
get more traction.
Shitty meme here. Shitty meme here. Good meme in the middle. Gets missed. Just saying.
What's that noise? Looks military to me. Definitely military. Probably classified too.
Dishfire, Prism, Sentry Eagle, Sigma, Mannequin, Artichoke, MK Ultra. Operation Project.
So this one fits. I was trying to find one that fits. So along my search, I came up with Operation Legacy. Because, of course, we talk about the British Empire. And, and I was reading that book, the audiobook's coming out, Proofs of a Conspiracy of, what was the full title of that? It's a crazy title, actually. It's right here.
It's a crazy
right
title.
Proofs of a Conspiracy against all the governments and religions of Europe carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies, collected from good authorities.
What a title. What a title. I mean...
But this is written in the late 1700s, so before the 1800s even. And it's written by a guy named John Robison, who's I think he's in real bad health and stuck at home, I think. But he's a professor of natural philosophy and secretary of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. But he's got kind of a rose-colored look at Britain, the freedoms of Britain, their constitution, and Christianity influencing the morals of people, let's say.
We've all got our biases, I suppose.
And, but he does talk about all these proofs of, and it does show that the Illuminati and the Freemasons and stuff, how they get in there and they try and influence based on supposed liberty and equality for all of the world. They want to take over religions and governments, or at least influence them.
For your own
and
good.
they do have all these people in their societies. I mean, in France, there was 266 lodges. This is back in the 1700s, in one country. I mean, I feel like this was more prevalent than we realized back then. But anyways, speaking of the British Empire, and wasn't the British Empire in full swing back then? Kind of. I mean, I haven't looked into the actual bullet point history of the British Empire kind of taking over the world, or trying to. But
why don't you? That'd be a fun show.
Yeah, I will. But the point is that I feel like he was kind of missing that fact. Like, what are you doing? Bringing your Constitution of Britain all over the world? I mean, I don't know what. Maybe that was. I don't know.
Is the Constitution of Britain any good?
Well, it seemed like it back then.
We got a UK posse. You want to know a weird thing? Is I was wondering the other day. I was like, whatever happened to Kevin Stevens from the UK posse? Because he used to be pretty. I used to talk to him quite a bit, I guess. And I mean.
On Twitter? Or?
Yeah, Twitter mostly is where we interacted. And I started thinking, I even actually went to the point where I tried to search for him, but I couldn't, he didn't pop up in the search or whatever. And then the next day I open up the app, and I keep mine always set to latest tweets so that I try and avoid the getting sucked into the algo of what Twitter thinks we'll almost interact with. Because, I mean, it probably has a better idea what I will interact with than I do. And next thing you know, I'm sitting on my steps fucking 45 minutes later cycling through Twitter, which I try to avoid, which the latest tweets tends to do, because now I don't because you always got to go kind of get past that screen to get to the everything else, because I do want to check the ads, because I mean, all these other guys, we don't get a lot of hate in our ads. So, I like to check them. That's where people interact. If it gets to the point where the ads get fucked up, I'll still stop checking it. But at this point I do check it. And, so I pop it open the other day, and there's 2 tweets from Kevin Stevens. So I know he's alive and well and still following us, and he had retweeted a few of our things. And you know what I think it is that there's so much interaction now on that stuff, is that I used to notice when he retweeted us all the time, it stood out. And now it's just like stuff gets retweeted. I mean, this goes back to my white hot fire memes, that the retweets and the favorites there are just too many of them for me to catch his name, I guess, anymore. I must just be missing it. So it's not Kevin's fault. It's my fault.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few others from the UK posse that I miss. I was thinking about that fellow that used to write in long, awesome emails. He was part of that other podcast called
The Now Defunct.
Yeah. And there was a great podcast. They were kind of like No Agenda-ish.
Very No Agenda.
From the UK.
Was Marsman from the UK?
No, I don't think so. Although he does sound, he does have that
listens.
British intellectual kind of bent to him, though.
The UK posse. And then there's always.
I wonder what he thinks of what's going on now.
Graham Gainsford, always over there. Actually, he just sent me a video of his daughter performing at a pub over in the UK. And she just knocks. I wish I had the clip open here now of his. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll dig it up, because I think Graham will get a kick of that if we play his daughter singing on the show. Graham's been around, of course, from like day one of our first listeners in the early episodes, one of the first people start interacting with us. He really wants us to do that reverse speech episode.
Well, we'll do it still. I mean, it's been years, but we can do that still.
Okay, you ready? This is shout out to Graham. This is his daughter singing over in the UK. Do you think we get in trouble for playing this? I don't think so, right?
I don't think so. I don't know.
There you go. I
can't
miss
find
live
it.
music.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds awesome, actually. It sounds pretty good. Yeah.
It's pretty good. Pretty impressive. Anyway, I sidetracked you. Were we in an opera
No,
or
I
something?
can't. I mean, I can't find the podcast that it was that he used to belong to, but it was with another fella, and they were kind of apart, I think, and they would put this podcast together, and it was great. And anyways, I was thinking about him the other day. I miss hearing from him, and I can't even tell you his name.
What's the oppo?
It's Operation Legacy. So this is a British colonial office, later called the Foreign Office, and it was a program to destroy or hide files to prevent them from being inherited by its ex-colonies. So speak about the British, empire invasion and stuff. It ran from the 1950s to the 1970s when the decolonization of the British Empire was at its height. So MI5, or the special branch agents, vetted all these secret documents in the colonial administrations to find those that could embarrass the British government. For instance, and this is from Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt. For instance, by showing racial or religious bias, they identified 8,800 files to conceal from at least 23 countries and territories in the 50s and 60s, and destroy them or sent them to the UK. Precise instructions were given for methods to be used for the destruction, including burning and dumping at sea. Some of the files detailed torture methods used against opponents of the colonial administrations, such as used during the Mau Mau uprising. As decolonization progressed, British officials were keen to avoid to repeat the embarrassment that had caused by the overt burning of documents that took place in the New Delhi in 1947, which had been covered by the Indian news sources.
There you have it.
There was an academic study of the end of the British Empire, has been assisted in recent years by declassifying the migrated archives in the Foreign Commonwealth Office. After it admitted in 2011 that it had secret documents related to the Mau Mau uprising, it began to declassify documents, and by November 2013, some 20,000 files had been declassified. That would be kind of interesting to look into some of those British Empire declassified documents.
Declassified British Empire docs. Can't hurt.
And then, of course, upon that, I found, searching for that, I found another interesting thing that kind of, has more to do with this episode with Robert Frederick and the Freemasons than anything. But it was a question of why Albert Pike's statue must fall, the Scottish Rites KKK project. And it was talking about this in the heart of Washington, this large statue and monument honoring the most important founder of KKK. Inscribed on the base of the statue are the words "poet." The terrorist anthem of the KKK was his most famous literary work, and jurist. He was called the KKK's chief judiciary officer and reputedly wrote the organization manual for the terrorist anti-black movement after the U.S. Civil War. The immense bearded figure of the Confederate General Albert Pike is looming over a public square in the nation's capital. Why has it never been pulled down in that predominantly black city? The statue is a tribute to the influence of Pike's organization. It has power in the executive branch and the Congress, and it's decisive in the courts. It has great power in all branches of law enforcement and the military. Do I mean that the KKK has much sway over the government? No, I'm speaking here of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, southern jurisdiction, of which Pike was the chief or sovereign grand commander.
The Grand Commodore.
Secretary Baker's grandfather, Captain James, or the rare scientist Julian Huxley to supervise the rare... Oh, boy, this gets right into it. I'll put a link. I won't get into this too much, but with the British imperial racist notions, Baker and Botts and the Scottish Rite Freemasonry have dominated the Texas power structure ever since. Gets into Clinton, Christianity, Bush's Zapata Petroleum, the ban Dark Babies movement, population control. I'll put a link. I won't get into all those details, but I'll put a link.
The BDBM
in the show notes. Oh, because I mean, how many of our guests on Outlawed have been talking about this kind of stuff lately, right? The our latest guest there, School World Order, talked about the what's the movement I'm thinking of?
I forget.
You know, when the eugenics movement,
The eugenicists.
yeah, the eugenicists, and the prevalence of that people don't really realize.
You guys got to check out the other podcast, Gramerica Outlaw. Just pop it in your pod player. Should pop up. You can check out the free show. Decide if you like it. If you like it, sign up for Plus. Get twice as much. Twice as much. 2 times. Speaking of what?
I got a, well, no, I shouldn't say that. I got a quote to share with you.
What?
I got a quote.
You just pulling that out now?
Yeah.
You trying to catch me off guard now. I see what you did.
I told you I had one,
Good
but
luck,
this is
Dunlop.
going to lead into.
Good luck.
It's the profound quote of the week. Darren, can you guess it? It's the profound quote of the week.
Okay, guess this.
Okay.
Can you guess the human who spoke it?
In other words,
or wrote it down? Profound
actually, let me start here.
boy.
The terms National Security Agency and Central Intelligence Agency are both based on the Nazi German Reich Schur Heitschaft. It's like a 50-letter word. In other words, we are dealing with a kind of hydra whose heads are attacking America from at least 2 directions, both from the inside to the Nazis that have been imported by Project Paperclip, and from the outside to an apparent alien threat. The end result of which was the creation of a super classified, deeply underground military-industrial intelligence apparatus, which eventually yields a breakaway civilization motivated by a fascist ethos, and one that is in no way under the democratic control of the elected representatives of the United States government.
That's how they get you.
Where's that? Who's that? Where's that from?
You want to guess?
Yeah.
Dave McGowan.
Close.
Close?
That's from our episode that just came out, the Grimerica Outlawed, Jason Reza Jorjani from his book Closer Encounters.
So it's his quote?
Yeah.
So how's that close?
Well, because I would say that he's onto some things like McGowan was, some deep investigations. Like, it kind of reminds me of McGowan's work in a way.
McGowan's work, great stuff.
So anyways, speaking of, do you want me to get into, speaking of eugenics, I mean, he gets into this. So the goal of this eugenics program, this is in his book again. I just happen to have a part highlighted here. Speaking of who was involved in this, the goal of this eugenics program was the artificially assisted evolution of a Nordic master race was a product of the Nazi ideologues. Hang on a sec here. Was artificially assisted evolution of which the Germans later rebranded as the Aryan race. The goal of this eugenics program was the artificially assisted evolution of eugenically bred Nordic people into a so-called master race, Heron folk of supermen. Who was spearheading this program? Rockefeller Foundation with research facilities at Rockefeller University, the Carnegie Institution with its laboratory at Cold Spring Harbor, IBM, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, Cornell, American Medical Association, American Museum of Natural History, American Genetics Association, Margaret Sanger, who would have found Planned Parenthood, Woodrow Wilson, a majority of justices serving on the U.S. Supreme Court, Department of Agriculture, and last, but as we shall see, most significantly not least, was the railroad magnate Edward Harriman and his financiers at Kuhn and Loeb. These Americans were in close contact with the British collaborators that included Sir Ronald Fisher, Julian Huxley, Peter Medawar, Francis Crick, Charles Spearman, Alexis Carrel, Bertrand Russell, George Bernard Shaw, Winston Churchill, Keynes, and then the Eugenic Education Society, the Galton Laboratory in London, and the University College of London.
Excellent. What a lineup.
All these individuals and institutions in the Anglo-American elite were spearheaded eugenics for the purpose of the creation of a Nordic master race. 2 or even 3 decades before, the Max Planck Institute in Berlin, Heidelberg University, and the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany joined the game after Adolf Hitler, who envied Anglo-American eugenics, and he came to power in 1933.
What's the book called?
Closer Encounters.
Closer Encounters. Check that shit out. Speaking of books, why don't you check out some of our books?
Adultbrain.ca. That's ADULTBRAIN.ca.
We just, you mentioned Bertrand Russell, who, of course, we have a bunch of his titles out there. You know, I was thinking we could take a minute. Of course, if you have Audible already, maybe check some of these out. You can check out adultbrain.ca, and there's a link there to get to the list of books in Audible. If you don't have Audible yet and you're not sure about it, I think you could still, I know back in the day you could always get like a free book. You could listen to at least one book for free and see if you like it. And if you do that, you know, we still get paid for that book. So it's something you can do, a way to support the show and listen to some cool stuff. And we go through the list of books quick. We got Super Hot. It sounds fine on my end, though. So
okay. As long as it's okay, you're coming through super weird and hot and crunchy right now. So as long as it's recording okay on your end, I just want to mention that.
Recording fantastical. There's a problem though. Maybe it's on your end. Something's up with you over there. A weird little dude. Proofs of a conspiracy against all religions and governments of Europe carried on by the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. ISIS Unveiled, Volume 2. So the first one was by John Robison. ISIS Unveiled, Volume 2, H.P. Blavatsky. The Occult World by A.P. Sinnett. The Seven Principles of Man by Annie Besant. What the Ancient Wisdom Expects of Its Disciples, A Study Concerning the Mystery Schools by Manly P. Hall. Is that better if I unplug it from the phone?
It sounds a little better.
No.
No?
Well, I don't know. That's got to be something on your end then. It has to be. The Problems of Philosophy, Bertrand Russell, The Religion of the Chinese, Through the Magic Door, Arthur Conan Doyle, ISIS Unveiled, Volume 1, Pantheism, Its Story and Significance, The Archaic, I won't go through those ones, those are all parts of the Secret Doctrine. Of course, my book, A Canadian Shame, Hamlet's Mill, Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, 2, and 3, Thought Forms, which is another one by Annie Besant, Mysticism and Logic, Bertrand Russell, The Unabomber Manifesto, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, The Secret Societies of All Ages and Countries, 1 and 2, Essentials of Spirituality, and The Esoteric Structure of the Alphabet. All fantastic books you can check out. Give them a listen. How are we going to finish the show if you can't put your headphones in?
I don't know.
You sound great, though, for what it's worth. Well, you want to do a social media thing? We could just save that for next week.
Yeah, let's just save it for next week. Yeah, this has been a great intro. I mean, honestly, I'm pumped about some of the shows we got coming up on Outlawed. The last one with Jason Reza Jorjani about Closer Encounters was like one of my favorite books and episodes ever. And yeah, lots going on there.
Lots going on. So we're hoping you guys can support the show. It's almost Christmas. Grimerica.ca/support if you can. When you can, maybe you can sign up for a monthly or make a one-time donation. You could head over to GrimericaOutlawed.ca, check out the other podcasts. Of course, you can check out the books at Adult Brain, contact@thecabin.com to check out all those events and all that fantastic stuff. But ultimately, we hope you guys have a fantastic Christmas. Merry Christmas. We'll be doing the Fandango. If you guys want to tune in live and listen to that, that'll be December 28th. You can take a listen to that. And I think that's about it. We hope you guys have a fantastic Christmas. Grimerica.ca/support. Help us have a fantastic Christmas too. And enjoy the chat with Robert Frederick.
Yeah, it's true, he puffs Christmas trees are medicinal.
Wait a second, is that? Yeah, I think that's Sasquatch beneath the mistletoe.
Get over here, Graham. Thank you for saving me and give me a kiss.
And it looks like Napoleon Doom is decorating the room with tinsels, ribbon, popcorn on strings, and poinsettias. They are in bloom. And you might ask, who's that in the green and red Lucha Libre mask? Why, of course, that's RPJ. Feliz Navidad. It's so warm and jolly. Cry Merry Christmas. Podcasting from the igloo. Darren plays jingle bells on the didgeridoo. And over there, that's Graham crying tears of joy as he listens in on the little drummer boy. You'll get a warm and fuzzy feeling if you donate to the Grimerica show. So get in the spirit, reach down in your pocket and make it rain. Let us know, make it snow, let us know, let us know, make it snow. Donate to the show. Donate to the show. Donate to the show. It's so warm and jolly. Cry Merry Christmas. Podcasting from the igloo. Darren plays jingle bells on the didgeridoo. And over there, that's Graham crying tears of joy.
Robert Frederick, welcome to Grimerica. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for having me. And you're responsible for this.
Oh boy, that's good because I need to hear this because it really fits with what we've been talking about and what books I've been reading and stuff. It kind of, like you were saying in your podcast, it fits it all together in a way. So let's start from the top.
Yeah, we've been talking about this stuff for years in Grimerica, at least half the existence of the show.
Of what, Bacon and Shakespeare and all that?
Yeah, I think Alan Green, the first time we had Alan Green on, I want to say was like episode 207 or something like that.
Well, I wonder if that's where I heard him. I don't think so, maybe, but he got me onto this Shakespeare authorship problem. Was hearing him on a podcast.
Yeah, we had him on a couple times, and I mean, and I read your Synchronicity, which seemed to kick this whole thing off that you sent me, and I can't find it for some reason right now, but it was a few years ago.
209.
Episode 209 was Alan Green. Yeah.
Time flies. You want to know the date? February 4th.
It might have been you guys, but it really shocked me that the only thing we had of William Shakespeare were 6 signatures, and 3 of them were on his will. Not one letter from William Shakespeare to anyone, or one letter from anyone to William Shakespeare. And it really piqued my interest because I had heard years ago that talking about the Earl of Oxford was supposed to be the real Shakespeare, and there was a documentary on TV about that, and I found that intriguing. But this, when he said that, I decided to look into it, I guess. But it was the first time I had really heard of it. It shocked me. And I was already on the British Empire thing, because the way I look at, I always wanted to know why the world was so messed up. And just everywhere there's trouble in the world, there's the English Empire. And certainly Canada has suffered greatly. You're still kind of under their thumb. And so I was kind of onto the English Empire, and I was sort of sniffing around Bacon. His name was sort of coming up a little bit. When one day, I was listening to you guys a lot then, and you were asking for synchronicities. And I had this crazy synchronicity where I was listening to Michael Wan, who you've had on your show. And he was talking about the Susquehanna River and Jamestown. And I went to college on the Susquehanna River. And he mentioned that Francis Bacon was largely responsible for starting Jamestown down in Virginia. And that just stunned me. I thought, oh my God, not more on Francis Bacon. And I started emailing my friend who lives in Europe, who's kind of a history buff. He's not a conspiracy guy, but he's a history buff. And we went to college together, and we lived on the Susquehanna. And I sent him this email, and I just kept typing, Francis Bacon, Susquehanna, Jamestown. And when I was done with the email, I turned and I picked up a book I had just taken off my shelf as I was coming up the stairs saying, well, I never read that book. Let me just look in that book. And so I finished this email, pick up the book, open it completely at random, look into the back of the book near the end at the bottom of a page, and I swear to God, my eyes fell on two words, and it was Francis Bacon. And the name of the book is The Nature of Coincidence by Arthur Koestler, who was kind of a history writer, and it was into like psi phenomenon and stuff. He was a wide-ranging writer, very famous in like last century, 50s and 60s. I think it's called On the Nature of Coincidence. So I was just floored. And, that started me looking into Francis Bacon. And as I started digging and digging and digging, it was like, you see a little something in the ground and you start pulling the earth away, and it just grows and grows and grows until you've got this, underground chamber that looked like just a piece of old wood sticking out of the earth. And I've become convinced that a lot of this is normie history, that Francis Bacon divides the ancient world from the new world, that the line between the old and the new runs right through Francis Bacon's life. And on this map that's on the screen, that's London during Bacon's lifetime. And they call that period early modern. Tudor London, early modern, and it would be Tudor London. And Tudor is the name of Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth. Their last name was Tudor. So when historians talk about this time period, it's called the Tudors, the Tudor London. It's a huge topic. They have tons of fans. It's Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth, Henry VII, Bloody Mary, burning people at the stake, the Reformation, war with Spain. It was a really, really crazy time in history, and a lot of colorful characters. The most famous of which are Queen Elizabeth, Francis Bacon, Walter Raleigh, Francis Drake, John Dee, and a few others. But what I discovered was that Francis Bacon, his claim to fame is that he's a philosopher, and he started the scientific revolution. He was like a cheerleader for science. And the famous book about him is Francis Bacon, From Magic to Science. And magic had infused all of Europe around this time, especially Christian Kabbalah and alchemy and
Hermeticism,
astrology was huge, even though Catholicism was still very, very powerful. But there were, cracks in the edifice, and the Protestant Reformation had begun in Germany, but it really took hold in England as well.
Sorry, what year would this be?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. When was the Tudors? Mid 1500s?
Right, sorry. Francis Bacon was born in 1561. The English Reformation began in like 1530. The Reformation in Germany began around 1520. So they were well into the Reformation. And after Henry VIII died, his daughter, Bloody Mary, took over. And she was a Catholic. So she switched the whole country over to Catholicism. And she's called Bloody Mary because she burned about 300 Protestants at the stake.
Wow. And is this when Anne Boleyn was in there too? And there was a great TV series. I mean, I don't know how accurate it was, but
The Tudors? Is that what you're talking about? I remember I never watched it, but I remember seeing commercials for it way back in the day. It might have been on HBO or something like that. It was on one of those. I
think it was the History Channel, maybe even. Yeah, it was. Yeah,
it was a crazy, crazy time, and there's just tons of stuff about it, tons of videos, tons of shows. Anne Boleyn was Queen Elizabeth's mother. Queen Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry VIII. Henry VIII
yeah.
cut off 2 or 3 of his wives' heads, one of which was Anne Boleyn, who was Queen Elizabeth's mother. Her mother lost her head when Elizabeth was 3. And that's how she grew up. And that's the kind of place it was.
And is that Bacon's mom?
I think Francis Bacon is the son.
Or sorry, I mean like that's the one that sort of interrupted you.
That's kind of the reveal, the big reveal. But the scuttle, it does seem to me that's what's really weird because she never married.
Sorry, I interrupted you there. You think Bacon's mom is who?
Queen Elizabeth.
Okay, you do think that, yeah.
And the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming, and it changes everything. But I think the fact that he was her son is why he was so driven and why he was so intense about English nationalism and was so driven. I thought he would be king one day, I think, but it was a state secret. Nobody could know. But lots of weird things that happened in his life only make sense as if he was her son. But her official title was the Virgin Queen. She never married, apparently. And that was a huge source of conflict amongst Londoners and the Tudors because there was no successor. Nobody knew who the next king would be, which was created a tremendous uncertainty. So it was a very, very uncertain time. And everyone was uptight so that everyone was spying on everyone else. It was still had a foot, that period of time still had a foot almost in the feudal era, where the lords and the earls and the dukes had a tremendous amount of power. England didn't have an army. It was quite easy to overthrow the king. All you needed was a small army and popular support. So there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, plus the French, and mostly the Spanish, were trying to kill Elizabeth. The Pope actually excommunicated Queen Elizabeth as a woman and as a Protestant, on the throne of England. So it was a really crazy, uncertain, violent time. But what it created was the best espionage network of all time to this day. The British intelligence is by far and away the best. And the reason for that are a couple of geniuses named William Cecil, who was the most powerful man in England at the time, who was Secretary of State and Treasurer, and this man, Francis Walsingham, who you may have heard of. He's extremely famous in the history of espionage. He not only uncovered plots, he created plots and then locked people up. And he's the one that finally... So there was another Mary, Queen of Scots, who he had her head chopped off in a very intricate plot that he designed, where he caught her, trying to take over the throne from Queen Elizabeth. But espionage is a key part of the Bacon story. So Francis Bacon was born in 1561, right next door to the palace where Queen Elizabeth lived. If you look over to your left.
The blue in the left there, yeah.
The blue, that is Whitehall Palace. And right next door to it is York Place, York House, where Francis Bacon was born, this enormous mansion.
So have you ever heard my theory on that at all?
Yeah, no.
The theory?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Let's
It's
hear
a
it.
crazy, wild theory.
Oh,
It's
God.
complete fucking speculation.
Let's hear
It's
it.
that people will not even, they'll be laughing at it.
Every theory you have is complete speculation.
So we had Marguerite Riglioso on the show. And she writes about the Immaculate Conception and how it's a secret sisterhood of these women who would go through this ceremony and this ritual together to perform these Immaculate Conceptions. I mean, that's just really that's high, super high level. Like it gets into quite a bit of details, but it's not just Jesus. There's been a whole bunch of other ones, really famous. Like I think Buddha, Jesus, who's the other one? I don't know if it was Hermes or if it was, what's his name? Thoth or not. who's the real man from Thoth? Trismegistus. I don't know. There was a few very, very prominent people, and it really started to make sense to me in a way. Like they can create this divine spark through sound or light or whatever, and they go through all this training, like this massive training to prepare themselves for this. And I thought Bacon is on that level. Like he's on, like when I listened to your podcast on him and how absolutely smart he is right off the bat. Like he is just like, he's almost at that level of divinity where it wouldn't surprise me if the Queen Elizabeth was in some fucking secret sisterhood and she was the virgin. Like this was another immaculate birth.
Well, if anyone was, it would be her. I mean, they were deeply connected to all that stuff. But Bacon, in my opinion, is the most influential person who ever lived. And I would say he's the smartest person that ever lived, but you can't really prove that. But I think I can prove that he's the most influential person that ever lived. And he changed the world forever for a number of reasons. Mainly because not mainly, but according to the outside normie world, it would be because he basically created modern science. And he started what's known as the Enlightenment. So this era was the Renaissance era with a foot in the medieval era. And the following era is called the Enlightenment. And he's considered the start of the Enlightenment solely because he was a cheerleader for science and natural science. And he literally invented a new way of thinking, or he codified it. And it's called inductive reasoning, as opposed to deductive reasoning, which is what the Greeks used. Deductive reason uses syllogisms, all men are born of women. Socrates is a man, ergo and to wit, Socrates was born of a woman. And Bacon could read Latin and Greek by the age he was 7. By the age of 12, he had surpassed practically everyone in the country. He had practically they say he read every book that was printed by the time he was 15.
And he was traveling at 15, wasn't he?
What's that?
Wasn't he traveling internationally at 15?
He left England at 15 under the aegis of Francis Walsingham, the spy. But what was I going to say?
About the reading all the books?
Mozart.
Yeah.
He was a Mozart. Mozart wrote his first symphony at the age of 8. Bacon was apparently writing plays and books at a very young age. He was just astonishingly brilliant. He had this crazy memory. His mother was an educator. His grandfather was an educator. He had all the best resources. The elite of London were very, very well educated. But he spoke Hebrew, Latin, Greek, Spanish, Italian, German, maybe some ancient languages. They had deep ties to the Middle East still, too. So there was just a lot of knowledge there, whereas most of the country couldn't read or write. Probably only 5% or 10% of the country could read or write. And most of the people were really poor, and they were, comparatively to most of the population of England, they were like ultra billionaires.
What was the time frame when the fellow who got credit for being Shakespeare was alive? Was he alive the same time as Bacon? Yeah. Is there any chance they knew each other somehow?
Oh, definitely they knew each other. Bacon and his people set him up as a front man. The actual Shakespeare, who we're supposed to say is Shakespeare, because that's how his name was really spelled, was in on it. He was the front man.
I mean, he might have even gone after him because of his name? Because you mentioned the
possibly, yeah,
the deity kind of reference to spear shaker.
Right. It all fit really perfectly, or he made it fit perfectly. But Shakespeare is a reference to Bacon's muse, who was Athena, who carried a spear, and she shook her spear at ignorance. So the name is actually a reference to Bacon's muse. And Shakespeare probably did not know how to read or write. There's no evidence that he could even read or write. There's no evidence he ever went to school. There's just no information about him besides a birth record a marriage record, the birth of his 2 children, and that he arrived in London, in the 1580s at the age of 20 something. There's just no record. And after that, there's absolutely no record that he wrote anything or that he even really. Well, there's no record that he wrote anything. He was involved in the theater to some degree as an actor, and then he eventually invested in one of the theaters called the Globe. But there's a brilliant video out now by a woman named Diana Price, and a book. She wrote a book called The Shakespeare Authorship Problem, New Evidence. And she, as a determined scholar, just examined every scrap of paper that was out there, and nobody knew Shakespeare as a writer. There's not one single reference to him as a person and as a writer. Like, I spoke to William last night. He's really struggling with The Merchant of Venice. He tossed some ideas around. He's moving in a new direction. Like nothing. Absolutely nothing. And he was a poor guy from Stratford. And there's absolutely almost no references to poor people in all of Shakespeare. There's not one reference to the town of Stratford-upon-Avon. There's only royals and wealthy people and elites in the Shakespeare plays. In fact, there's a distinct kind of disdain for commoners in the Shakespeare plays. They're almost like a side note. So it makes no sense. Mark Twain came out with a very funny book, which is another great video called Is Shakespeare Dead? Somebody turned his book into a one-person play. It's hysterical. Because Mark Twain was a commoner genius. But he wrote about life on the Mississippi. He wrote about his childhood, running around as this poor barefoot kid, having adventures. Whereas Shakespeare from Stratford-upon-Avon never even mentioned his hometown.
What did your friend think of all this? Your historical friend that you called from Europe, like,
he's not chomping at the bit because he's not a conspiracy guy. He doesn't really get it. It's too much. Like most people, once they accept Shakespeare was Shakespeare, you can't change your mind at the age of 50 or 60. It's too weird. It's like trying to, it's about the moon landing or JFK.
Yeah.
It's just too weird. And it is very shocking and weird because this has been, it's been 400 years.
But even that aside, I mean, it's the whole like English Empire thing, which is fascinating because,
well, that gets really weird. At that point, I get weird. This is kind of basic stuff. Like literally, if you just watch Diana Price's video and, Mark Twain's video, it's like, how could he possibly have written Shakespeare? It could not have happened. If you know anything about Shakespeare, you know how dense the characterizations are and the fact that you needed to know all of English history and all of European history and Roman history. You had to know 5 languages. And you had to have access to books that were only in Latin or Greek. You literally had to know how to read Latin and Greek to have written the Shakespeare plays. And this guy, there's only 6 scrawled signatures of him. There's no record he even owned a book. I mean, it just gets preposterous. And it should be pretty easy to people say, yeah. And the only argument they have is they tell you, well, you don't think a commoner can be a genius. You don't believe in genius. But that's a bunch of bullshit because, like I just said, Mark Twain was a genius and he was a total commoner. Oh. There's also manuscripts of him. There's also evidence that he actually wrote. And he actually wrote about his childhood. Or somebody like Bob Dylan, who came from, the boonies and came to New York and changed songwriting forever. The total commoner genius. I totally believe in commoner geniuses.
Well, Mark Twain too, like you just said.
Yeah, Twain's the best example.
And what about Watts? Was he a commoner?
Watts?
Alan Watts, is he even a real person? Yeah, he is, right? Which brings me to my next question. Is there, because you mentioned Mozart at 8 and Beethoven's deaf and he's writing symphonies. I mean, are all these motherfuckers fake?
No.
Okay.
No. Mozart was totally real. Bacon was totally real. It just, they didn't want Bacon to be known as a playwright, as a genius. That's why the podcast called The Hidden Life is Best. They kept Bacon hidden, and Bacon even wanted to be hidden. He got that idea as a very young boy. He was going to work behind the scenes. He didn't really want to be famous. Whereas Mozart was paraded around by his father and said, look at what this boy can do. And he had him out performing at the age of 5. But Bacon was an extraordinary genius and knew already as a young person, he mapped out this idea of staying behind the scenes. Plus, if he was Elizabeth's son, he already was hidden. He already was in this strange netherworld where he couldn't really say who he really was. And England was under threat, and he really wanted to build an empire. There was something very early in him that he wanted to conquer the world. And
but could that also be because England was under threat and it was so...
Exactly. It came out of this pressure cooker insecurity of London. And also, but it's kind of part of what the Londoners lived on. I mean, they read all the Greeks. The Greeks are constantly talking about empire and tyranny, and the Romans, were an empire for almost like 700-800 years. And they read all those guys. They were very familiar with the history of Rome and all the famous Romans, Cicero and Horace and Marcus Aurelius, and he wrote plays about them. So this idea of empire was on his mind, and he was a big fan of this Italian writer named Machiavelli, who's considered one of the greatest philosophers of all time. And he wrote about how to establish a strong kingdom in a book called The Prince. The Prince means the king. And he basically told princes and kings to lie, like pretend to be good, pretend to be religious, use murder, use terror. This is how you stay in power.
Which seems like that's really, it stayed that way for 400 years now.
It's still happening.
When was Machiavelli? When was that book written then? Was that way before Bacon?
Was about 50 years before Bacon. Right. He was the late 1400s in Florence, right when all this new occult information was coming in that sparked the Renaissance. Things like Hermeticism, Hermes Trismegistus, Christian Kabbalah, magic, Cornelius Agrippa, Arcelio Ficino, and the Greeks, the Aristotle and the Plato came back in, and it sort of created this new movement called humanism, where the power of the church, you didn't just have to wait and suffer through life and hope, you got chosen to go to heaven. But this idea, this humanist idea, was that you can change life on earth. You can have an impact on earth. You can be a person of action. So the philosophy was changing. And Bacon absorbed all of that. And that what led to his push for science. And so at 15, he went to France and he was involved in espionage. At the age of 15, he invented ciphers. So because of all the uncertainty, there was all this code writing. All letters were written in code, and they had to be deciphered. You had to have the key. You had to have the cipher to break the code.
Yeah.
At the age of 15, he invented some incredible ciphers that bear a strange resemblance to today's computer code, though he didn't have anything to do with that. But where it gets really weird, and the Shakespeare thing is only a part of it, but he came back and he became a lawyer. He went to law school at the age of 18, and he's considered one of the greatest lawyers of all time. In the field of common law, he actually kind of cleaned up the law books. He eventually became Attorney General of England, and he eventually became Lord Chancellor of England, which is the second most powerful position in the country. But this was only happened after his mother died. And nobody knows what Bacon was up to between the ages of like 20 and 44. He was a lawyer, but he didn't practice law. He sat on Parliament and the Commoners, but they worked like 2 weeks a year. He had a few side gigs, and for Queen Elizabeth, he was learned counsel, but it wasn't even a paid position. It wasn't an official position. And it took someone until like the late 20th century, like the 1900s, to say, what the hell was Francis Bacon doing between the ages of say, 20 and 44? He didn't write any books. He wrote one book called The Essays. It doesn't seem to be, nobody knows what he was doing. And if you read a standard biography, they'll just gloss over that. They'll fill it in, like he was on Parliament, he was in law school, he got involved with his brother.
What do you think it was?
True. He was writing Shakespeare. Those are the exact years that Shakespeare was coming out.
Wow.
Exact years. And the first poems came out. And the very first poem that came out was called Venus and Adonis. And it's a very violent poem. It's a very sexual poem. It doesn't really fit the tenor of the times, but they allowed it to be published. The censorship was very intense, very strong. Tudor London was a police state. England was a police state. You couldn't leave the country without permission. You had to be very careful what you published. You had to be very careful what you said. Everyone was always listening. Spies were everywhere. All the dukes and earls and lords all had their own spy networks. But the poem was allowed to be published. And immediately some other poets wrote poems about the poem. And that's what they did in Tudor London. Was poetry was huge, like painting in Florence, 100 years earlier, or sculpting, or philosophy in ancient Greece. They wrote poems. And two other poets wrote to Bacon, answered this Shakespeare poem called Venus and Adonis. And they immediately called it out as something, sounds like Francis Bacon wrote this. So immediately, right away, people were on to the ruse, but they got shut down. He couldn't talk about it, because this is where I get slightly original, is because I asked the question, if Bacon wrote Shakespeare, what does that mean? What are the implications of that? It's not just because, aristocrats
he wants to get creative.
Put their name on plays.
Yeah. It wasn't just a creative outlet, obviously.
It wasn't a creative outlet. It was a project of British intelligence. It was a method to control the population and a method to do, what's called social engineering. It was a method to get ideas out into the public. And part of that is standard history now, because he wrote all these history plays. He wrote 10 history plays about the succession of kings in England, all in order to prop up the Tudor regime. They were written, they always made the Tudor regime look good and legitimate and strong. And it's so obvious that everyone knows Shakespeare knows that history plays were written as propaganda for the Tudor regime.
And that would have been a good way to communicate to the masses, right? Because you don't have the internet, you don't have
still
even
doing
like
it today.
A mail system. Well, but I mean, that puts Hollywood and all into perspective, right? I mean, it really makes me think of like, this has been going on for 400 years. Like,
exactly.
And they blame the Jews, but it's actually the Brits.
Exactly.
The fucking UK posse, you motherfuckers.
Exactly. There were no Jews in England at the time. They had been kicked out in 1290. So
Can we say Jews? We could say Jews, right? That's okay. I don't know what's okay anymore, man. I don't know.
I know. I was going to ask you, Darren, what do I call your people?
You can call me an Indian, but I wouldn't call anyone else that. But
you can say call native?
I prefer Indian.
You like Indian?
You can call me indigenous, or you could just call me Darren. I like Darren. That the best.
Darren. You hit the nail on the head. Like, entertainment is a key part of any state, any empire. And it's absolutely true today. How many entertainers have come out against the lockdown or the vaccine mandates? Like, almost none. So it's really important to control entertainment. And Francis Walsingham, the great spy master, he had his own theater troupe.
Oh, there you go.
So they knew, and Bacon knew all the old myths. Bacon knew the impact of stories on people. So that's really what Shakespeare was, and that's why nobody could chat about it back then, because it was a state secret. And if tongues wagged, tongues got cut out of their heads, or you got your ear cut off. That's why nobody could talk about Bacon being the secret son of Queen Elizabeth. You couldn't talk about it, and nobody could write it down. Most people couldn't write.
Who's his dad?
His dad was a guy named Robert Dudley.
Do we know him, or is he smart cat? Is he a smart cat? Dudley is not sounding good.
He's a smart cat. He was super educated. He came from a wealthy family and was thrown in the Tower of London. This is how the story goes. Queen Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley were both in the Tower of London at the same time, put there by Bloody Mary because they were afraid of insurrection from them, because Dudley's father had tried an insurrection against Bloody Mary. And his father was put to death by Bloody Mary. So they were in the tower at the same time, and they had known each other since they were kids, since there weren't a lot of aristocrats. I don't know how many. I need to talk to an expert from this time period, but I guess it was like 500 people controlled 1 million people in England. Most of them lived in London or had big houses in London. And these two aristocrats, Elizabeth and Dudley, were thrown in the tower, which is all the way to the right of the screen. That other blue line there is the City of London, and that's the Wall of London, London Wall, and that's the Tower of London, which was the notorious prison where they threw people in there sometimes for decades. And then, just by the way, that's London Bridge. There was only one bridge over the River Thames, and that's it. Just to
the north there, the northernmost blue
to the
line.
left of the tower. You can sort of see the Tower of London.
Yeah.
So they supposedly even secretly got married in the tower, or they were secretly married later. Oh, I should have found that picture. There's a painting of Elizabeth where she looks quite pregnant. And supposedly, dig this, as soon as Elizabeth gets installed as queen, she's only 25 years old. She makes Robert Dudley her master of the horse, which was a title then. He had to take care of the horses. And just so happened he had to have an apartment right next to hers.
I still think it wasn't Dudley. It was immaculate, but we can go.
Oh, my God.
Jeez. Whole palace. And apparently they did get married.
So the second coming of Christ already happened? Is that what your theory is? And it was Francis Bacon, and he set us up for this fucking totalitarian nightmare? Thanks, Jesus. Thanks.
Yeah, see, people try to paint Bacon as this, force of wisdom and goodness for the world. And that's what almost all Bacon researchers think. But in fact, it is exactly the opposite. And what he sought to do, I'm cutting to the chase here, but what he sought to do was always preserve these conditions of an elite few lording it over, the suffering masses. That's exactly what he wanted to do. But he knew conditions were changing, and so he was going to need science to do that. But yeah, so I do think he was the son of Elizabeth, and there is a father. And he wanted to be Prince Consort, which is what you call the king. That's what Prince Philip was to Queen Elizabeth II. And there are letters, there's diplomatic letters that talk about the fact that they have a child. There's a lot of evidence that they had a child together. And some Bacon researchers think they had two children together.
So who are the co-conspirators then on, like, you mentioned the British Secret Service. So is this all just like an MI6 operation that's doing all this?
Yeah, all these people like this William Cecil, the guy I showed you here, he knew. Walsingham knew. I think quite a few people knew, especially about the Shakespeare. I mean, they had to have known, actors and other playwrights and any of the other aristocrats, because they all were writers, they all were in on the scene, and they all had to be in on it, and they all just kept their mouths shut, and they killed the paper trail. But yeah, this was a state-sponsored operation from the very, very top. Everyone knew, probably on a need-to-know basis, but it couldn't have just been Bacon and a couple people. It was too big, and it went on for too long. And then later, this huge book came out, the first folio. But here's where it gets really weird. is that Bacon is heavily and obviously, and now it's common knowledge, started the Rosicrucian movement, which was a semi-hoax, but it galvanized all of Europe, France, Germany, parts of England, where they came out with this pamphlet. Now we're in like 1616. Bacon has power. Oh, by the way, he never got any power under his mother, Queen Elizabeth. Only when she died, and this next king was King James I. King James I knighted him right away. He wasn't even a knight. He was still Mr. Francis Bacon. His mother wouldn't even knight him. She wouldn't give him any power because she knew if he had any power in the court, he could maybe finagle a little side group. So it was very weird to go back to that point that nothing happened for Bacon until his mother died.
Well, back then, that sort of shit put a target on your head right away, too, right?
Yeah. That's why she didn't want a successor, because all they had to do was kill her and there would be someone to take over.
Yeah, and then when he's a kid, then you just sort of cram him in the back corner and make all the decisions.
Exactly.
And then you kill him when he starts getting too old and asking questions.
That's how it worked. And they were so brilliant that Elizabeth survived for 45 years. She died an old lady, still on the throne. And apparently it was almost her dying breath where she said, "Let it be James. Let James be king." You know, she wouldn't say. She wouldn't even talk. It was illegal to talk about succession, like who was going to come next. It was a very eccentric part of Tudor London. Couldn't discuss who's coming after Elizabeth. It was forbidden. So James gets in, and a few years later, this Rosicrucian craze takes over. And that was philosophy, these writings, the Fama Fraternitatis, the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, the Fama something. And it said that we are a secret brotherhood. We are the invisible college. We have special knowledge. The world is changing. And this is what we know, and this is what we do, and we do healing, and we have knowledge, and it drove everyone crazy. Everyone was completely galvanized by this message, and it had a Christian veneer, a Christian Rosenkreuz. And they would still talk about, Jesus, our Lord and Savior. But it was really prophetic because the world really did start to change right there. And the writings of the Rosicrucians, there were only 3 things published, and nobody ever even admitted to being one. It was a secret brotherhood, and it all sort of died out when Bacon died later. There are Rosicrucians now, but they don't really have any connection to that period of Rosicrucianism. But it was very kind of mystical, but it was actually also a lot about science. It's so obviously Baconian. And what's really weird is that that's a precursor to Freemasonry. And what Bacon here, and I go a little bit out on a limb here, but I'm far from alone, is that it appears that Francis Bacon started modern Freemasonry. And
under the guise of Rosicrucianism at first, or?
The Rosicrucianism sort of softened people up for this idea that there's a hidden brotherhood that's working for the benefit of all humanity, right? That's what every cult is doing, is benefiting all humanity, and that helps pull people in.
But most people think that Freemasonry wasn't started till the early 1700s, I guess, right?
Freemasonry didn't become official. They announced themselves to the world on St. John's Day, 1717. Sometimes you hear the date 1723. But they were already a fully formed group. It was 4 lodges came out in England, and they said, we are now the United Grand Lodge of England. We are the Freemasons. And to this day, nobody can really say who started the Freemasons. Because what's another now accepted, I consider it a fact, a cold hard fact, is that the Freemasons developed out of the Knights Templars. And I know that sounds crazy, and I know it sounds like a fantasy novel, but it's always been the rumor, and the connections are just too absolute and too strong. And if anyone is interested, this is a great book called Born in Blood by an independent historian who's not a conspiracy guy. He's not anti-Freemason even. But it tells this great story of the Peasants' Rebellion in the 14th century. And he ties Freemasonry to the Knights Templar unequivocally. Like, the rumors are over. It's true. The Knights Templars became the Freemasons. And in my opinion, that's the biggest story of the entire last millennium. The Knights Templars were so freaking powerful and so rich and had their hands in basically everything. They're implicated in starting banking, shipping, warfare.
And when would that have been then? When did that transition happen?
That would have been the 1300s. They started in the 1100s to protect pilgrims on the Crusades. So all the Christians ran down to take over Jerusalem from the Muslim heathens, and they needed protection. And so the Templars were formed, the poor knights of the Temple of Jerusalem. And they protected, that's not their exact name, it slipped my mind.
Yeah.
They would provide protection for the pilgrims going down to Jerusalem. The First Crusade actually did take over Jerusalem, and the Christians controlled Jerusalem for like 150 years, I think. And they established themselves in Jerusalem and in Europe, and they actually started banking, because if somebody wanted to travel to Jerusalem, they could deposit their money in Europe with the Templars and take a check, and when they got to Jerusalem, they could cash the check and get their cash for a small fee.
And then when they got forced underground, that's when it became Freemasonry, or
not quite. So 1307, the French king and the Pope move on the Templars, because they had got involved in some really dark, ugly, heretical stuff. They also were too rich and powerful. They wanted their money and their land. But it does seem, this is where the Gnostic element comes in, that they converted to a strange form of Christianity called Gnosticism, specifically Manichaean Gnosticism, which believes that this world was formed by the creator God, but that creator God is a sub-god and a demiurge and is evil. And he created this world to trap our souls. And our job as Gnostics is to gain gnosis, or knowledge, collect sparks of light, so that when we die, we can navigate this complicated metaphysical hierarchy and escape the prison planet that the evil demiurge has created. It's really, really nutty. And it leads to scientism, and it leads to what Bacon got heavily involved in, which is wanting to take over the world and do battle with God, because God is evil. They sincerely believe that. And it was a big movement. Gnosticism was a big movement. I believe it came out of trauma. Just like there's always kind of a push for something happening, like the espionage in England got so strong because of the uncertainty. Well, this Gnostic belief that God was evil probably came out of a lot of trauma. Certainly the Roman Empire was going around, killing thousands of people all the time. But it's a response to why is there evil in the world? How could there be a just God who allows such evil in the world? Which is still a philosophical question people are still debating. Now, I've come to my own conclusions about that. But
can you mention it? Or
Gnosticism came in.
Can you get into your own conclusions about that?
My conclusions are that that the evil is a result of free will. That actually God loves us so much, he gave us total freedom. And we are able to do whatever we want in this plane of existence, which is just one of many planes of existence. And it's a place where we go to develop our souls. And if we didn't have evil to contend with, how could we develop our souls? We would just be like the angels. That's what makes us different than the angels, is that we have to struggle here. We have a challenge. Our challenge is to be happy without being nasty and evil. And I think because there's a pull to being powerful, there's a charge, you get a charge from it. And how can we still be happy and be a good person? We're here to understand good and evil and develop our souls in a moral way, like struggle with morality. And if there was no evil, there would be no struggle. And that's how I've worked it out. It's a consequence of free will.
It's interesting.
That life is a gift. Life is beautiful. Life is intensely complex and kind of perfect. You just look at your body. Science tells me that life is incredibly beautiful and must have a creator. You've got 2 trillion cells in your body. And each one of those cells, they think 2 trillion. It might be 1.5. It might be 3. They're not even sure. Each one of those cells has hundreds of thousands of molecules. Each one of those cells is a complex, choreographed work of, symphonic beauty, carrying out specific tasks connected to all the other cells in your body almost instantaneously. Like if you see something, your adrenal gland immediately pumps out adrenaline, and it's like a split second. You just saw it with your eyes. Your adrenal gland responds. And supposedly hormones leave your brain to turn on your adrenal gland, but it's trillions of cells in this complicated symphony just to allow you to walk through this beautiful planet with each creature. One tree, is almost infinitely complicated to allow you to find love and purpose and meaning and build a house, run away from lions, fall in love, raise your children, do whatever you want to do. But it's this incredible, beautiful world that good far outweighs the evil. And just the fecundity and the health of the planet. I really, truly believe that joy is the ground of being. And I'm an herbalist, and the plants taught me that. Like, just look at how plants are. They're just ecstatic.
But has this research changed your view at all, though? Because, I've been reading these books now from the 1800s and the 1700s. There's this one we're reading called Proofs of Conspiracy, and it's about the Illuminati and the German Union, what you're talking about here really puts that book into perspective, because they were spying. Like, the Illuminati would bring people in, they'd say, you got to watch your neighborhood, watch your people, and we want to know. Like, it was creating this spy network basically, and for them to figure out what the personalities of these initiates were like, and they would talk about it being
exactly what we're talking about.
And they would talk about being like for the liberty and equality of people. That was the whole, like the first few levels of initiation, and their whatever would become public would be about that, right? Although they'd have to take over or at least infiltrate the church and the state to in order for that to happen. But that was that
was their draw. That's what pulls people in.
Yeah.
I mean, the church was this is what pushed that. The church was too severe. And the church was burning people, and the church was censoring people. And there needed to be a loosening.
But this was like in the 1700s, though, in France, they say there was like 266 lodges of Freemasonry. I mean, to me, it seems like Freemasonry became the infrastructure for all these other little organizations.
100% correct. I'm glad you're reading that book. I've always wanted to read it. I have been reading about it recently.
It'll be out in audio soon for you. So.
Awesome. He was approached by the Illuminati to spread the Illuminati in England, and he pretended to go along with it. And he saw what they were up to, and he tried to expose it.
That's interesting. So that was before Weishaupt's time, then, like a couple 100 years or 150 years before.
No, it was right around the same time. Weishaupt was 1770s, and this guy was 1770s. He was a contemporary of George Washington. So
I thought you were
debate
talking
on
about Bacon. Okay. Yeah.
The debate on Freemasonry, did it start good? Because of course it has good. It says it's good. Of course.
Well, we know lots of great guys. A lot of our guests have been Freemasons, and they're fantastic people. They're very, It
doesn't have to wreck you. It doesn't have to make you a bad person. It's a feeder system.
Yeah.
You attract people, and you see who's really set to go up to the higher levels, and
or to other organizations like the German Union or the
exactly
Illuminati or whatever. Yeah.
To where the real craziness begins, for sure.
So has that changed your opinion? I know you've got this sort of rosy look on humanity and life and this divinity that we are.
I have a rosy look on life. I think life is exquisitely beautiful, but it's humans and our free will and our, you could call it Satan, you could call it Lucifer, like tempts us to seize power and control. And these guys do that because they feel justified. It's a religious crusade because they really do believe that there's a demiurge who's evil, and it's almost their responsibility to wage war. And they're actually trying to steal the planet from the demiurge.
It's happening right now. They're justified in their totalitarian efforts. They feel justified.
That's why I'm good, bro. This is exactly the Great Reset. Like Francis Bacon is a direct precursor to the Great Reset. Because it's all about science, right? They've replaced religion with science. Illuminati were completely successful. What does the government say now? We were founded under trust God, and God we trust. What is it now? Trust the science.
Yeah.
And you can't even debate the science. Like in the old days, you couldn't debate the religion, right? It had to be about Jesus. You could sort of fudge the boundaries, and you could say anything you wanted about science. You could believe whatever you wanted about how mice came into being or how the world started or anything. But now you can't debate the science.
I know.
anymore.
It really feels like we haven't even moved forward in a lot of ways.
On Twitter. No, they just replaced religion with science. Because it's easier to lie with science so they can take control. They just wanted to take control. They didn't care about humanity.
Well, science, you can change the narrative too, right? You can't really do that. You can only take so many hard right turns or left turns with religion. With science, we could just be like, oh, shit, we were wrong. You motherfuckers can't leave your house. Sorry.
Yeah, it changed. Yeah, we have new data.
Exactly.
The data's out. You guys are a threat to yourselves.
Yeah, there's no book of science. Like, you still got to kind of follow the Bible if you're religious.
Yeah, exactly. So but you bring this a lot back to like the British Empire and how does the sort of the occult magic part fit into this this initiative of like taking over the world via the British Empire? Because then we get into where does John Dee and all that fit in with this, where you kind of get some real like.
That's a great question. So Dee was very influential on the whole Rosicrucian idea. And the occult, what I think happened.
So he was at the same time as this?
Absolutely same time. Dee was just before Bacon. Dee was hugely influential in that whole occult milieu. And they shoved all the occult stuff into Freemasonry. Freemasonry is really a religion. They say it's not a religion, but it believes in God. It has ceremonies. It has rituals. It has funerals. In fact, you can't be a Freemason if you don't believe in God.
Well, they say great architect now, right? Is that just their
alcoholics?
Is that just Alcoholics Anonymous way of saying God as your own understanding?
Well, it just says higher power now. It just says you have to believe in a higher power.
That's the first question they ask you.
I just went through it all. Like,
you believe in a higher power, yeah.
I was just initiated into the Masons like 2 years ago.
No kidding.
Yeah, and then I left because I didn't agree with their fucking COVID protocols.
It's funny, Robert. I thought you heard that because you mentioned in your podcast about how you can actually leave the order now.
No, I didn't know that.
I wondered if
they sent me a letter. Yeah, I have a fancy letter of whatever. But they said I could come back anytime. But they did send me like a fancy calligraphy letter that was my official
leaving.
I can't remember. Yeah, fancy word for leaving.
Yeah.
Good for you, Darren. Mark Twain was a Freemason. He left. I have a good friend who left. Well, that's one of the reasons why Freemasonry is so strong, is that you can leave.
Yeah, and I
cults
still have a huge amount of respect for a bunch of Masons that I know,
Yeah.
but it's just
Yeah, I
like, you
agree.
know what? If you guys aren't going to stand up to tyranny, then I can't be a part of this shit.
Good for you, man. Good for you. No, I know a lot of Masons too. I know some Masons. But that's one reason it's so brilliant, is that you can leave. Most cults you can't leave. You get shunned. You get harassed, like Scientology or Jehovah's Witness or a small cult. They'll just harass you and harass you and harass you. The Masons you can walk away from. And that's one reason it's so successful and so brilliantly organized. You know, it's semi-independent. There's no actual central charismatic leader, which is the definition of a cult. You're supposed to have a charismatic leader, central figure in an inner circle that everyone tries to get into the inner circle. So Freemasonry is outside that strict definition of what a cult is. But on the other hand, it takes over some people's lives. And if you ever go to a cemetery and you see all those obelisks, I don't know if they have that up in Canada, but the East Coast of America here was heavily Freemasonic. There's a lodge in every single town. And there's hundreds of small towns in New York. And any town over 500 people, I think, has a lodge. I mean, you know, spitballing here, but they're everywhere. And you go to the cemeteries and there's obelisks everywhere. Guys just love Freemasonry. And I get it. You know, it is a brotherhood. You do join this club. You do feel connected. And it's great for business. I don't know if they told you that, Darren, but, you know, if you need some printing done, you know, hire a brother to do it. Keep the money in the family. And you join a brotherhood. And Freemasonry, it was Freemasons that wrote the Constitution. And that Constitution is keeping us protected from a lot of this tyranny that Austria is suffering under, Australia, Canada. Also, the Indians, though, the Iroquois Indians developed this whole idea of republic within a republic. So the states' rights here, like DeSantis down in Florida, can tell Biden to fuck off.
Yeah, it really felt like that came from all the learning of the late 1700s and the mess ups with all those organizations through Europe and England.
Native Americans, specifically the Iroquois Indians, that developed that system where you have separate governments under one bigger constitution. Each state has a constitution, and you're under one bigger constitution. That was how the Iroquois Indians organized themselves right here in upstate New York, and they were amazing. I think they had the most highly developed democracy of all time. If you look into it, it was consensus democracy. Women could participate. You know, grandmothers could impeach the leader. God forbid you if you got impeached. You couldn't be sachem if you wanted to be. You know, it was. They knew about tyranny. They knew they had to protect against tyranny, just like the founders here did, and they wrote that very complicated constitution to try to protect against tyranny. And so far, America's ahead of, you know, the Europeans, because they can't give us a blanket vaccine mandate here. They can't give us blanket lockdown orders here like they can in Austria and Australia. That comes from the Iroquois, but it also comes from the Freemasons. And that's what makes this complicated, is that there is a lot of good in Freemasonry, and there was a lot of bad in the church.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Yeah. Like all cults use this idea of we're gonna get something spectacular if you join us, and we're gonna be good for all humanity.
We're gonna change the world.
This is what our cult's missing. We need that better care.
I was thinking about you guys. I mean, you guys could start a cult so easy. But
we get accused of having a cult.
But yeah, you just got to say the right things and get people convinced and give them a sense of belonging. But here's a funny thing: is I told you the period just after the Renaissance is called the Enlightenment. Freemasons, you know this, Darren, tell you will become enlightened by Freemasonry, and Masons call themselves sons of light and followers of light, which ties back into the Gnosticism, where you're supposed to gather sparks of light. And light is kind of like the key word, the signal word for Gnosticism. And it's rife in Bacon. Bacon's writings, he's always talking about the light. And he even makes mistakes. And in fact, The New Atlantis, his most famous book, is called The New Atlantis. And it's about a utopia that some sailors stumble on. They're lost at sea, and they come upon this utopia. And the utopia is very much based on science. And at the very end of the book, they're talking about knowledge and science and good for all of humanity. And the head of the new Atlantis, it's not called Atlantis, called Bensalem, says, actually, what we're looking for is light. And that's how the book ends. And he just tips his hand right there, like, we're Gnostics and we're looking for light. And it's just rife. When you start to read Bacon with this idea that he was a Gnostic, all this stuff just tumbles out. And he's making references to it. And when you read Shakespeare with the idea that he was a Freemason, there's just massive amounts of Freemasonry.
Like MacBeth?
Shakespeare. And now if we cut to MacBeth, there's a new version of Macbeth coming out on Christmas Day by Joel Coen of the Coen brothers, with Denzel Washington, Francis McDormand. So this is good timing.
It'll be woke Macbeth, I'm sure.
It's going to be some woke, but you can't change Shakespeare. You can change the locale and the milieu and the costumes.
Oh, they'll change it. They can change anything they want. They can change anything they want. They can. They will just use the name Shakespeare and create their whole new modern.
They just changed Graham's show, so he's super aggro.
Oh yeah, there's a
right
fantasy series called The Wheel of Time, and they're completely destroying it.
Right,
they're destroying it.
You can change some words to modernize them, but they'll lose all credibility.
They don't care about credibility. They'll do it.
No, dude, this is Shakespeare. You can't actually add to Shakespeare.
Okay, I want to be in contact with you after this comes out.
We're going to talk afterwards.
Yeah, I want to talk.
I tell you, it's going to be word for word like the original play. If not, I stand corrected. I'd be shocked.
Oh, this is fascinating. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
But they're changing the race, and they're also making.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I don't care about that. It's changing the content of the.
I totally hear you.
You can see. I don't know if Denzel will go woke. You think?
He did. They're all part of the system.
Even
they're
Denzel?
gonna use it for their own ideology.
Denzel?
I'm telling you. We'll see. This will be the greatest test, because you're right. They should never even touch Shakespeare. I mean, Robert Jordan's fantasy novel is one thing. His 14 massive books is one thing.
Didn't he not even finish it? He just walked out on it? Oh, he died.
He died. I mean, this is a desecration on his life.
Who wrote the last book then?
Brandon Sanderson wrote the last 3. It was one big book turned into 3.
Was he qualified for it?
Yes, he did a great job.
Did they know each other?
No. But Shakespeare will be the ultimate test, because, like Robert says, there's no way he should be changing any of that. But we'll see.
We will see. Speaking of seeing, where can people see more of Robert's stuff? Do you have a YouTube channel? I know you have the podcast and all that. Where can people find all that?
But hiddenlifeisbest.com.
Let's just, can you summarize that Macbeth thing quickly for us before we let you go?
Thing. And this has really shocked me and really gave me the creeps, man. Like I couldn't work on this for a couple of weeks.
Really?
Yeah, it really gave me the creeps.
I've hated Shakespeare's since I was a kid, so I don't even really know it. Yeah,
it's not real popular. You're supposed to like it. You're supposed to know it. I don't know why my screen's not opening some of these pictures.
No, I can see
Queen Elizabeth with the eyes, the all-seeing eye, and the Agatha Damon Gnostic snake. So the Queen knew about this, and I think this Masonic Gnostic imagery was already pretty deep into the Tudors and into England and London. It just got shut down by the church and by the people. The people were just really strongly Christian and didn't trust anything. There's the Gnostic snake. They worship the snake. Let me see. I didn't give you guys a picture of Bacon yet.
No, you're not. You're still on the map.
Not giving us
too.
any pictures.
Yeah.
Oh my God, my screen is filled with pictures.
Yeah, you got to. I don't know. Maybe stop sharing and try sharing again. Or I'm not sure why it's not.
We're running out of time, right?
It's
not really.
Oh well, technology. So Macbeth is a story of a man who is coming home from war. He's incredible warrior. He basically wins the battle for Scotland single-handedly when he and his friend Banquo come across 3 witches who tell him he's going to be named Thane of Cawdor, which is sort of like being called the Duke or the Earl of Cawdor. He's going to get a new royal position of gentry, and that he will one day be king. And then they tell his friend Banquo that, Banquo, you're not going to be king, but your kids are going to be king. And they're completely stunned by it. And as I read it again today, parts of it, like MacBeth seems to go into a trance when they say that to him. He's like, and Banquo's goes, what's the matter, man? Where are you? Where'd you go up to? And immediately MacBeth gets the idea, because 5 minutes later, someone runs up to MacBeth and calls him Thane of Cawdor, like the witch's prophecy comes true. And MacBeth turns to the witches and says to them, from whence did you get this strange intelligence? So he calls them intelligence, and that was the name for a spy in those days, intelligencers. And they're like spooks. Spooks is another word for spies because they can kind of come and go and vanish. So what happens is MacBeth gets this suggestion, I'm implying it's a hypnotic suggestion, to kill the king. I'm going to cut this real short. And he goes back to his castle, and his wife somehow also just agrees with him. We're going to have to kill the king. And that's the central part of the play, where MacBeth doesn't want to kill the king. He changes his mind, and his wife pushes him to do it. And MacBeth starts having these visions of a knife, and the knife pulls him toward the king, and they murder the king. And again, I'm going to cut this real short. It foments a civil war. There's this disaster in Scotland, and there's a horrible civil war. And MacBeth becomes a serial murderer, and he kills a bunch of people, or has his people kill a bunch of people. And it's really grisly. It's really like on stage, bloody violence. A little boy is killed on stage. It doesn't happen off stage.
Jesus.
And, the Polanski version is modern and fun. Not fun, but very watchable. Roman Polanski made a version in 1971, just after his wife was killed by the Manson family. And he's kind of creepy. He's an occultist. I think there's some connection there. And then the play, eventually, I won't, you can still watch it. MacBeth goes back to see the witches again. He's now murdered Banquo and tried to murder Banquo's son, because he now believes everything the witches say. They said Banquo's son was going to be king. So he tries to kill Banquo and kill his son. And he goes back to see the witches, and they give him this prophecy that no man of woman born can kill MacBeth. That's one of the things they say. And they also show him 3 visions. And also, Darren, you'll have to go listen to episode 4 of my podcast. Start at the 55-minute mark if you don't want to hear my talk about scientism. And I do a review of Francis Bacon's life. But the 55-minute mark, I jump into a detailed exploration of MacBeth. And you'll have to get into that because I detail all the Freemasonic imagery in MacBeth that comes from Freemasons. Freemasons have analyzed the play. And Freemasons have analyzed all of Shakespeare. And dude, it's just mind-blowing how much Freemasonry is in Shakespeare. And this is 120 years before it was officially a thing. 140 years. It's just crazy. Once your eyes are open, it's like, what? So MacBeth is kind of all alone in his castle. And this other main character, Macduff, had fled to England and roused the Duke of Northumberland to send an army, which is called the English Army in the play. And Macduff and the army and the former king's son march on Macbeth's castle and eventually slay him. Macduff first runs in, the Duke of Northumberland's son. Macbeth kills him. Why they let the little boy come in, I think, is a form of sacrifice. Macduff comes in and finally kills Macbeth with the English army behind him. So what happens is that the true hero of the play is the English army. everyone else in the play screwed up royally.
Huh.
It's not really a tale of good against evil, because Macduff kills MacBeth, but Macduff had abandoned his family and to get killed. And the true evil, the witches, is never confronted. They never actually confront the evil. The evil is not overcome. The evil just created this horrible chaos, which the English army,
the empire, has to get rid of.
Order.
Yeah.
It's like, we have to invite the English army in. We can't handle Macbeth. And nobody ever mentions the witches. And the only people that saw the witches were Macbeth and Banquo, both dead. And the other person that heard about the witches was Lady Macbeth. She's dead. And at the end of the day, the English army is the hero. And nobody ever notices that. But that's the actual story. And
Wow.
that fucking creeped me out.
Yeah,
Because
that's
what
great.
it is Macbeth is actually a Lee Harvey Oswald. He's a Sirhan. He got mind controlled to create an assassination that started a civil war. And how many times has England done that in the ensuing 400 years? I mean, that's how World War I started.
Yep.
The assassination of Archduke Ferdinand.
Yeah. And World War I was, I want to do something on that a little bit more, because I think that was we were talking recently about that being a real pivotal point in erasing.
That was it, dude.
Erasing a lot of. Actually, you might have touched on it in one of your podcasts.
I did. They wiped out the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the Russian Empire in one fell swoop.
Yeah. Redrew a lot of the lines. Yeah. Yeah. And not only the Middle East, probably Europe too, I think, right?
They redrew the map of the Balkans, and they screwed up the Germans. And if you read Guido Preparata's Conjuring Hitler, you'll see that they knew that the Germans were going to go hard right.
Wow.
And totalitarian, and they wanted to pit them against the Russians, because the English were afraid of the Germans and the Russians, because they were just as powerful as the English. They were just as smart as the English, and they had more land, and they had to destroy Germany and Russia for England to remain powerful. And that's the shit that Bacon and these guys would think about. They became these masters of geopolitics. And we didn't really get into the occult, but it shows the occult, because I believe that mainly the occult is used for mind control. And there's no accident that the word cult comes from occult, and they suck you in and they promise you visions.
Yeah, the inversion parts and
greater knowledge. And then the inversion, they tell you that, you're here to change the world. And anyway, we're way over time, huh? Yeah, it's 6:30.
Yeah, it's just fascinating.
That's the shit, man. They're taking over the planet in a war against God, and they'll do anything to do it. And right now, they're vaccinating little kids with poison to weaken us all. They don't give a fuck. They just want.
But this is what people need to know of some of this history, right? Is some of this has been going on for hundreds of years. I mean, they're talking about
hundreds of years, and Shakespeare was a project of British intelligence, and I think I can continue to make that clear. And I think Macbeth makes that clear.
So are you going to keep going on your pod? Are you going to keep pushing out episodes, or are you thinking about a book or something maybe in the future? Or because
I need to do a book about this, possibly to bring in some income. But I'm going to keep popping out episodes, and I'm probably going to, instead of these very difficult scripted shows, do some interviews with people.
Yeah, man, let's do this again when you in a few months, maybe 6 months, 4 or 6 months or something like that. And
I'd love to. Thank you.
I'd love to. And then we can get a little update. We can get into the occult side of things a little bit, see where things are
we'll
at.
do more with the occult, because I got a lot to say about that. But you can see how giant a topic it is, from the history of England to British Empire to the history of science to Freemasonry. Freemasonry alone is just crazy enormous.
Yeah.
And by then I'll probably be ready for my close-up. Prime time.
Mug shot. Right on, Robert. Where can you give us those links again where everyone can track you down?
So it's thehiddenlifeisbest.com. And everything's there, lots of links. I'm going to put up some of the links of what we talked about. There'll be more photos. I'll give you links to this map and this interactive map. Thehiddenlifeisbest.com.
Right on, buddy.
Right on, Robert. Thanks for taking some time out of your Sunday to talk bacon with us. I might have bacon for dinner.
Hey, I love you guys.
Okay,
Hang
take care.
tough.
Yeah, thanks, buddy. Take
Stay
care.
strong.
We
Peace.
will. You too. All
Okay.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And that was a chat with Robert Frederick. What'd you think, buddy?
Oh, yeah, man. Like he said, it was just scratching the surface of it. Yeah,
You got a little triggered on the Wheel of Time thing, but that's all right.
great.
I get
No,
it's
it's
fresh
good.
for you.
I
It's
can't
fresh.
wait to see if
You're
you
just
do
going
fuck
on.
up
It's funny
Shakespeare
because you
or
were
not.
just going off about it like yesterday in the
Yeah,
truck.
yeah.
Unsolicited too.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just because it's really bad.
Did
It's
it just come out then?
It's episode 6 right now.
What episode are you on?
6. I've been keeping
Can't be
up.
that bad.
Well, no. I mean, I'm gonna watch the first season, but they are really like just destroying it. They really are adding a whole bunch of crap in for no reason at all. It's really weird. They're just taking. I don't care about the multi-culti aspect of it, like whatever that. But when you're changing the story for no reason at all, and you're messing up the story, and it's not the writing's not good either. There's all kinds of problems and mistakes with what they're changing, right? It's like, why are you changing the story? Keep it as much as you can with the story, you'd think. But the guy admitted that in spite, he's going to make some of the characters gay to piss off some people. I can just make them gay. So the ladies, like this whole female power structure that's there, right? They're just lesbians now.
And they
Just
weren't
necking
before?
in it. No, not really.
Or before it was just unmentioned?
Yeah, it was kind of mentioned like briefly that they're very close, but they have to start necking and stuff, right? In this.
Well, you
They
should
have to
you don't like that kind of stuff? Girl on girl?
Not these two.
Like penetration?
That's not even the point, but that's just that's just one of this minor changes that have messed up the whole plot. And the whole Dragon Reborn is, I don't want to do any spoilers here at all. The Dragon Reborn is supposed to be a male,
try not to
right?
spoil it.
Now they're hinting that it could be a multi-headed dragon and a female. And like, what are you talking about? Like, that's changing the core part of the book. The female source of the power is the male source of the power is tainted. And this Dragon Reborn comes in and he has to destroy the Dark One, basically, kind of thing. And now they're going to just change the whole basic thing.
I just started watching the next season of Lost in Space came out, so
cool.
I watched an episode of that. It's probably ruined or something too, but I just don't notice. I guess because there was I don't know if there's a prequel to it. I guess it's sort of loosely based on the Swiss Family Robinson or something.
Okay.
I don't know. It's just like I use TV as just like, junk food. So it fits that.
Well, this is an interesting one because it was a book I read over the last 4 decades from the 80s, 90s, 2000s. And then I
finally finished that book
in 2015, right? 14 books.
14 books.
Yeah. Massive books, like 14 huge books.
Tomes.
You know what I found in reading this book about the proofs of conspiracy about the Illuminati and the German Union and all this stuff?
What?
There's 2 characters in there, Dr. Stark,
Tony Stark?
and Pot.
Marijuana?
No, like Potts, P-O-T-T. Like,
Oh.
I mean, do you think they get names from some of those secret societies and make like Marvel Universe movies out of them and stuff and comics?
Maybe.
And Stark and Pepper Potts.
I don't know who Potts is.
That's his assistant.
Oh, is it?
And Gwyneth Paltrow.
Interesting. Well,
Yeah,
I
it's
do
when
think
they
that they scour all those old stuff just for ideas.
Yeah.
Like, ooh.
Yeah, there might not be a magic aspect to it.
Yeah,
but,
it's just fucking straight up plagiarism.
Yeah. Well, not even plagiarism. You're just getting names for characters. But there must be a power to it. Like, I mean, I do that in Dungeons and Dragons. So I look at historical, like three. I shouldn't say this.
It's time to wrap this up.
This is going to
get into D&D.
This is going to be
protocols. That's gone too far.
Yeah, I don't want to say it because it'll ruin the surprise.
Give it up for you, for the guys tonight, in case they're listening to this live stream. You don't want to fumble up your D&D tonight?
No, not for tonight. For the
you're planned out a few
plot.
weeks in advance.
Yeah, months.
Months.
It's a big thing. Yeah,
months. He's planned out months in advance. But on the podcast, hey, I didn't have time to.
It's not all planned. Like it's not all written out or anything. It's just in my head.
Speaking of tomes, head over to adultbrain.ca if you want to check out some of the tombs we've turned into audio. Adultbrain.ca. Get all our audio books that Graham's narrated for you over there. Proofs of Conspiracy be coming out this month. ISIS Unveiled Volume 2. bunch of other great titles over there. Contact at thecabin.com if you want to check out one of our events, our theme-based tours or workshops, whatever they are. They're a blast. Whatever they are, we have a blast doing them. And Arizona's now sold out. Utah's sold out. We still got the 2 Randall Carlson events. There's room in both of those next year. And then the first event launched of 2023 is the Oahu, Hawaii, stargazing on the beach, surfing with Dave Matheson, cold training, volcanoes. I think there's a mountain in there somewhere. It looks great. It's going to be a blast. Contact at thecabin.com. And of course, we can't do the show if you guys don't support. Grimerica.ca/support. If you guys could sign up for a monthly or make a one-time donation, or maybe head over to Grimerica Outlaw and sign up for Plus over there. Whatever couple of bucks you can throw into the system to keep the gears lubed up and keep everything going. Once again, it's not a free show. It's a value for value show. So if you add some value to your day, to your life, to your commute, consider throwing some value back our way. Grimerica.ca/support. I think that's about it. We love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
I hear my soulmate whistling like a tea kettle, playing that seductive game, running through the meadow, amongst the flower petals, amongst the flower petals. She likes to swing on the swing set, singing 90s hit songs, 90s hit songs. How do you unfold your music? Have you got a computer synced up to an auto-tuner? Oh, woo-hoo-hoo! I got psychedelic in the summer. Man, it was a bummer when the leaves turn black, when the leaves turn black, when the leaves turn black. I tried to reach you, but my limbs were broken, but my limbs were broken. How do you unfold your music? Have you got a computer synced up to an auto-tuner? Oh, woo-hoo-hoo! Like a light at the end of a tunnel, I hear my soulmate whistling like a tea kettle, playing that seductive game, running through the meadow, amongst the flower petals, amongst the flower petals. She likes to swing on the swing set, singing 90s hit songs, 90s hit songs. How do you unfold your music? Have you got a computer synced up to an auto-tuner? Oh, woo-hoo-hoo! Up to an auto-tuner. Oh, woo-hoo-hoo!
weather.